Montana, 1889. The Bitterroot Valley was a kingdom of jagged peaks and a sky that never ended. It was a land that promised everything and gave nothing for free. The air carried the sharp scent of pine needles and the heavy, metallic breath of the coming winter. Silas Thorne stood at the edge of his property. He looked toward the Bennett farm, a lonely silhouette against the darkening horizon. He was 30 years old. His hands were calloused by hard labor. His heart had been quiet for years. He had moved to Montana after years of drifting, searching for a peace he could not find back east. He was a man who lived in the margins of life. His neighbor, Clara Bennett, was the heart of the valley. She lived alone in the cabin her husband had built 20 years ago. Clara was 46. Her beauty had deepened with the passing years. The sun had softened it. The mountain wind had given it strength. Her husband, Elias, had been stolen from her by the big die-up winter of 1886. That brutal freeze had wiped out half the cattle in the territory. The bitter cold had taken Elias Bennett's life. Since then, Clara had managed the land with a stubborn grace. She commanded respect from every man who rode through the valley. Silas watched her from a distance for a long time. He saw her hauling heavy buckets of water from the freezing creek. He saw her struggling to mend the heavy gates of the cattle corral. But it was the firewood that finally brought him across the fence line. The first frost had already painted the windows in crystalline patterns. Clara was in the yard, swinging an old rusted axe at a stubborn cedar log. She was wearing a faded blue dress and a red shawl wrapped tight against the breeze. Every swing looked like a desperate prayer for strength. Every swing fell a little short of the mark. Silas did not say a word as he walked up the gravel path. He simply reached out and took the axe from her tired, trembling hands. Clara gasped, stepping back and clutching her shawl to her chest. She looked at him with eyes the color of a deep mountain lake. They were wide with surprise, then narrowed with a pride that nearly sent him away. "I can do it, Silas Thorne," she said, her voice steady despite her ragged breathing. "I know you can, Mrs. Bennett," he replied softly, "but you shouldn't have to." He set his boots firmly in the dirt and began to work. The sound of the axe hitting the wood was a rhythmic, honest music. He split the cedar into perfect, clean pieces. He worked until the sweat soaked through his heavy linen shirt. He worked until the pile of wood was tall enough to last her through a Montana blizzard. Clara sat on the porch steps and watched him. She did not offer him water right away. She just watched the way he moved. He had the efficiency of a man who knew the value of a job well done. Silas felt her eyes on him. For the first time in many years, he felt a strange warmth. It had nothing to do with the sun or the labor. He stacked the last of the wood under the protective overhang of the porch. He wiped the blade of the axe and leaned it carefully against the log wall. Clara stood up, smoothing her apron with her palms. "You're a fast worker, Silas," she said softly. "A man has to be if he wants to beat the snow," he answered. He turned to leave, but she stepped forward, reaching out a hand. "Stay for a moment," she said. "The coffee is fresh." He hesitated, crushing his hat in his hand. He knew the town of Stevensville loved to talk. They would gossip about a young man spending time at a widow's cabin. But the wind was turning cold. Her eyes were the kindest things he had seen in a decade. He followed her inside. The cabin smelled of dried herbs, wood smoke, and history. It was a clean house, but it was a lonely house. There were no pictures on the mantel except for one. It was a small, faded sketch of a young man in a uniform. Silas looked at it and felt a sudden, sharp pang of recognition. "My son," Clara said, noticing his gaze. "He died during the troubles of 1877. This is a quiet frontier drama. It does not dwell on violence. It only remembers the sorrow left behind by hard times." Silas nodded slowly, his voice thick. "I'm sorry, Clara." "It was a long time ago," she said. But the way she touched the frame told him it was only yesterday. They sat at the small, scarred wooden table. The coffee was strong, hot, and black. "Why did you come over today, Silas?" she asked. "The wood needed splitting," he said simply. "Lots of things need doing in this valley," she countered. "You don't go around doing them all." Silas looked down at his coffee, watching the steam rise. Yours seemed more urgent. They sat in a silence that was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood a hard truth. Life was mostly about enduring. Outside, the sun began to dip behind the Bitterroot Range. The peaks turned a deep, bruised purple. "I should get back," Silas said, standing up. "Come back Tuesday," Clara said. "The fence at the south end is sagging." Silas nodded. "I'll be here." And so it began. It was a silent agreement between two souls, a man who had too much strength and a woman who had used too much of hers. Over the next few weeks, Silas became a fixture at the Bennett farm. He fixed the leaking roof before the rains turned to sleet. He hauled the heavy sacks of grain that weighed 100 pounds each. The town noticed, of course. In the general store, the whispers were like the buzzing of summer flies. Martha Higgins, the town's self-appointed moral compass, made her move. She cornered Silas near the post office. "It's a charitable thing you're doing, Mr. Thorne," she said. Her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "It's just being a neighbor, Mrs. Higgins," Silas replied coldly. "A neighbor usually expects something in return," she pushed, her lip curling. Silas did not answer. He bought his nails and walked out into the cold air. He did not care about the whispers for himself, but he worried they would hurt Clara. A woman's reputation in 1889 was a fragile thing. Montana was about to become a state. People wanted everything to be respectable and orderly. They did not like things they could not easily categorize. Was he a servant? Was he a suitor? Was he a son? The truth was, Silas did not know what he was. He only knew that when he was at Clara's, the world felt right. The ghosts of the war stayed at the fence line. One afternoon, while they were repairing the heavy barn door, she spoke. "Do you ever think about going back east, Silas?" Clara asked. She was holding the lantern while he hammered. "No," Silas said. "There's nothing for me there but ghosts." "Ghosts are heavy," she whispered. "I've carried a few myself." Silas stopped hammering and looked at her. The lantern light cast long, dancing shadows across her face. She looked beautiful. The lines of worry around her eyes only added to her depth. "You shouldn't have to carry them alone," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy with a weight they both felt. Clara looked away, her hand trembling slightly on the lantern handle. "I've been alone a long time, Silas. I've forgotten how to be anything else." "Maybe it's time to remember," he said. His voice was a low growl of conviction. Before she could answer, a rider pulled into the yard. It was Henry Miller. He was a wealthy land speculator from Missoula. He was a man who saw the valley as a series of numbers and deeds. He got off his horse, his boots polished to a high shine. His suit was clean, pressed, and too fine for a muddy farmyard. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, tipping his expensive hat, "I see you found some hired help." Silas felt his jaw tighten until it ached. Clara stepped forward, her chin held high. "Mr. Thorne is a friend, Henry, not help." Miller smiled politely, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course. I'm here about the offer I made last month. Your husband trusted me once with business advice." "I am only trying to keep you from losing everything." "My answer is still no," Clara said firmly. "The railroad is coming, Clara," Miller said, his voice dropping. "This land will be worth 10 times what it is now. But only if it's managed properly." He looked at Silas with pure disdain. "A widow alone cannot hold out against the taxes in the winter. It's better to sell now and retire comfortably in the city." "I'm staying," Clara said. Her voice was like iron. Miller sighed, as if talking to a difficult child. "Think about it carefully. I'll be back on Statehood Day." He rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy feeling of dread. Silas looked at Clara. "He's going to keep coming, isn't he?"
"He wants the water rights," she said, her voice weary. "The creek runs through my lower pasture." "I won't let him take it," Silas said. Clara looked at him, and there was a deep sadness in her smile. "You can't fight the world, Silas." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can fight for this farm." That night, Silas did not sleep. He thought about the sacrifice Clara had made to keep that land. She had buried a husband and a son in that soil. She had bled into that ground. He realized then that he wasn't just helping a neighbor. He was in love with her. The realization was a terrifying thing.
She was 16 years older than him. She was a woman of stature, and he was just a man with an axe. But as he watched the stars over the mountains, he knew he could not walk away. Before we go on, tell me where you are watching from tonight. Many of you share stories about your mothers and grandmothers. That is why these Old West stories matter. If Clara and Silas have touched your heart, please subscribe. Now let's return to the Bitterroot Valley, because Clara's hardest test was still ahead. The month of October was cold, gray, and unforgiving. The talk in town had turned ugly and sharp. Martha Higgins had started a rumor. She claimed Silas was only after Clara's land. They said he was waiting for her to fail so he could claim the deed.
Silas heard it at the blacksmith's shop. He nearly broke the man's jaw, but he held back. Violence would only prove the gossips right. He went to Clara's house that evening. She was sitting by the fire, her head in her hands. "They're talking, Silas," she said without looking up. "I know," he said. "Maybe you should stop coming. It's not fair to you." Silas walked over and sat on the hearth near her feet. "I don't care about fair, Clara. I care about you." She looked at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Why, Silas? I'm a tired widow with a failing farm."
Silas took her hands in his. They were cold as the mountain ice. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. And you are not done yet, Clara. You're just tired." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a silver watch. It was an heirloom from his grandfather. "I sold my best saddle horse today," he said quietly. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Silas, no. That horse meant something to you." "It did," he said, "but your home means more. I paid your back taxes for the next 2 years."
"Miller cannot touch you now." Clara stared at the receipt he placed on the table. She started to sob. It was a deep, soul-shaking sound. Silas held her. He did not say anything. He just let her cry out 4 years of loneliness and fear. Then he whispered, "You do not have to be strong every single day, Clara. Not anymore. Let me carry some of it." It was a silent sacrifice. It was the kind of thing men like Silas made without expecting a reward. He had given up his mobility and his pride to give her peace. The controversy in town did not stop, but it changed its tone.
People could not understand why a man would sell his best asset for a neighbor. They started to see that maybe it wasn't about the land. Maybe it was something they had forgotten existed. Henry Miller heard about the paid taxes before sunset. After that, his visits became less frequent. A farm with paid taxes was much harder to frighten. November 8, 1889 arrived with a blast of winter air. Montana was officially admitted as the 41st state of the Union. In Stevensville, there were flags, music, and a giant bonfire. Clara and Silas went together. They walked down the main street, her arm tucked firmly into his. The whispers started immediately, but they did not look away. They walked past Martha Higgins, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. They walked past Henry Miller.
He looked like he wanted to spit on the dusty ground. They were a statement of defiance, a younger man and an older woman, standing together against the expectations of a changing world. At the bonfire, the music was loud and the mood was festive, but Clara looked overwhelmed by the noise. "Let's go home," Silas whispered. They walked back in the silver moonlight. The mountains were stark white with fresh snow. The air was crisp, clean, and full of promise. When they reached her porch, Silas headed toward the woodpile. It was a habit now. He picked up the axe to split a few logs for the morning fire. Clara stood there, watching him in the moonlight. She looked at his broad shoulders and his steady, capable hands. She looked at the way the moonlight caught the gray in his hair. Suddenly, she started to laugh. It wasn't a sad laugh. It was bright and clear, like a silver bell in the night. Silas stopped and looked at her, confused. "What is it, Clara?" he asked. Clara leaned against the porch railing, her eyes sparkling. "I was just thinking, Silas Thorne," she said. "You're a good man. You're a hard worker." She paused, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "But where were you 20 years ago?" Silas blinked, his axe resting on the log. He wasn't sure if he should be offended. Then he saw the beautiful smile on her face. "20 years ago, I was 10 years old, Clara," he said deadpan. "I was likely busy getting into trouble in a schoolhouse in Ohio." Clara laughed harder, stepping down the stairs to reach him. "That's the trouble," she said, touching his weathered cheek. "If you'd been here then, I might have saved myself a lot of heartache." Silas dropped the axe into the dirt and took her in his arms. "I'm here now," he whispered. "Is that enough?" Clara looked at him, and the joke faded into something much deeper. "It's more than enough, Silas. It's everything." He kissed her then. It was tender, quiet, and full of respect. It was not a tentative kiss. It was the kiss of two people who had found each other in the storm. The age between them did not matter. The town's gossip did not matter. Only the warmth of the fire and the strength of the wood they gathered. In the following months, the valley grew quiet under the winter snow. Silas moved his few belongings into the cabin. They did not have a big, fancy wedding. They went to the preacher and said their vows in front of the mountains. Tom, the blacksmith, was their witness. He was the only one who had seen the truth from the start. Life was not easy. The Montana winters were still cruel and cold. But they had enough wood. They had enough food. And most importantly, they had each other. Silas continued to work the land with a ferocity that scared away the weak. He never replaced that saddle horse. He said the walk to the barn gave him time to think about how lucky he was. Clara grew younger in spirit. She still wore her red shawl, but she did not wrap it quite so tight against the world. She knew she had a man who would stand between her and the wind. There was one more moment of controversy. A year later, a distant relative of Elias's showed up. He claimed he had a legal right to the farm. He was a bitter man who tried to use the law to evict them. Silas did not use an axe this time. He used the words of the new Montana state laws. He had spent his nights reading by the fire while Clara slept. He showed the man the tax receipts. He showed him the marriage license. He showed him the door with a look that brooked no argument. Clara watched him handle the situation with a quiet, terrifying power. She realized that Silas hadn't just saved her farm, he had saved her soul from the cold. She often looked at him while he was out in the yard. She would think about that first day. Greatest love stories happen after the world thinks you're done. Years passed slowly on the Bennett farm. The railroad came through the valley. New houses rose where open grass had once been. Montana changed from a frontier into a community. But on Clara's porch, some things stayed the same. Clara still wore her red shawl on cold mornings. Silas still split cedar before the first snow. Sometimes his hands moved slower than before. Sometimes Clara had to remind him to rest. But every winter, the woodpile stood high against the cabin wall. And every year, on the anniversary of that first day, he did something. Silas would go out and split a single log of cedar, and Clara would always ask the same joke. "Where were you 20 years ago, Silas?" And he would always give the same answer. "I was on my way to you, Clara. I just took the long road." Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. Silas and Clara's story reminds us of a simple truth. It's never too late for a new beginning.
Dignity is found in the work we do for those we love. If this story touched your heart today, please leave a comment. Write the word faith. It tells me this story found the right hearts. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. In our next video, we tell a story of the Yukon Gold Rush. A young school teacher finds a secret hidden in the permafrost. It's a story of courage and mystery you won't want to miss. Until then, stay warm. Keep your fires burning bright. I'll see you in the next one. Good night, and God bless.